This game's old, right? I mean, it couldn't possibly be worth your money in the modern landscape of gaming. Think again. Like me. I'm MTK, and today we are reviewing Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. This review was requested by one of my viewers, and even though the game came out back in 2019, there are still a lot of people that are just now being introduced to the Souls games, thanks to the massive success of Elden Ring. So I'm going to go over the good, the bad, and whether it's worth your money in 2024. Also, if there's another Souls game that you would like to see reviewed, make sure to leave it in the comments. So let's get started with the story. You play as Wolf, a shinobi known as Sekiro, by which the game is named, which means one-armed wolf. And he serves a young noble named Kuro, who is the divine heir of something called the Dragon's Heritage, which means that he possesses a unique blood that has the powers to grant immortality. The story centers around the kidnapping of Kuro and your subsequent efforts to retrieve him. In true FromSoft fashion, the story is awesome. It's deep, it's compelling, and it's rich with Japanese-style lore. It's also very choice-based, with multiple endings that are dependent upon the choices that you make in the game. The characters that you meet are also a high point of the game. They are very deep and intriguing, dark and mysterious, and they really help to pull you into the world. Now, one of the first differences between Sekiro and the other Souls games is that its story is a little bit more surface level than FromSoft's other games. In the majority of Souls games, you kind of have to put in the work to really understand the story. And while there is some of that in Sekiro, for the most part, if you stick to the main path, you'll at least be able to get the gist of what's going on and feel like you have a good grasp on the story and its characters. Now, from person to person, this could either be a negative thing or a positive thing. If you are really in love with FromSoft storytelling, you're not going to find the same depth in Sekiro that you would in, say, the Dark Souls series. But it does have its own charm and style to it that I believe is a welcome addition. Visually, this game still looks good. It's not the best, obviously, it's an older game, but it's definitely nothing to complain about. It still has a certain art style and shine to it that I believe is still pleasing to the eye, even to this day. It also has some of the best music in the Souls genre. This might just be a personal thing, but to me, the menu music is a straight banger. I would listen to it in the gym, honestly. The sound effects are also something to be admired, especially during combat. The way that the blades ping off of one another as you're battling with enemies really helps to build that experience of two highly skilled swordsmen doing battle to the death. It's truly something that adds to the whole experience. Performance-wise, it's very solid, which is to be expected. It's a fairly old game now, so they've had plenty of time to fix and patch various issues. But it's worth noting that you shouldn't have a problem in the performance department. Now let's get to what I believe is this game's shining star, the combat. First and foremost, the combat in Sekiro is very fast-paced in comparison to the other Souls games. Very smooth, but it is breakneck pace when you stack it up against something like Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3. Bloodborne is even slower paced than Sekiro is, in my opinion. One of the reasons for this is the way the parry system works in Sekiro, which it is pretty much a pioneer in the Souls space because it was really the first and the only game to be so parry heavy. So how it works is your enemies have poise meters, and as you attack your enemy, that poise meter begins to fill, and it also fills when you do a successful parry. But the moment you stop attacking, that meter begins to deplete. So the way to get the most bang for your buck is to stay on offense as often as possible and then parry any incoming attacks so that you can continue to fill the poise meter. Now once the poise meter is full, you can then execute a death blow, which have really awesome animations that are so satisfying, but all of the bosses have to be killed by executing a certain amount of death blows, most of the time 2 or 3. This whole system, while I will admit has a very steep learning curve, once it clicks, it is so much fun to run through and just decimate enemies, parrying everything they throw at you. It truly makes you feel unstoppable. But because of the skill required to play this game, it's widely regarded as the hardest Souls game ever made. I don't really fall into that camp. I think Bloodborne is the hardest Souls game made, but there are a lot of people on the other side. If you learn to parry and become good at it, you're going to have a great time. If you don't learn to parry, it's going to seem like the hardest game ever made across all genres. The bosses are also amazing, and because of the back and forth nature of the combat, it really feels like an achievement when you do beat them, and the battles themselves are just epic. Overall, I feel like the combat in Sekiro is the funnest and most polished combat that FromSoft has ever created. The only negative thing that I'll say is I do wish that there were more weapons. You really just have one weapon. Even if it was just different types of katanas, that would be better than just one weapon and nothing else. But if you've watched my reviews before, you know that that's kind of a pet peeve of mine, so take that as you will. Now let's talk about the general gameplay. Everything plays very smooth, from traversal to combat to performance. It all just works. The progression is decently deep, although it's not as deep as the other Souls games. You don't have a bunch of different stats that you invest in as you level up, or really anything like that. There is some of that to a degree, but nowhere near as deep. So if that's something that you really enjoyed, you're not going to find that in Sekiro. But I will say that the system that they do have is well done, and you don't necessarily miss the old system. Exploration is also alive and well, but also not as deep. Again, this is something where the other Souls games kind of trump it as far as depth goes in this department, but it's still there, and you'll still have fun with it. However, an area that I believe Sekiro surpasses the other Souls games is its replayability. Because not only does it have New Game Plus, but it also has something called Reflections of Strength, where you can basically go back and challenge old bosses from the bonfires, essentially. And it also has something called the Gauntlet of Strength, where there is a list of bosses that you have to defeat, and if you can't defeat all of them without dying, you have to start over from the beginning. So you can see how all of that just makes the game so much fun to do run after run. And honestly, I had a ton of fun just jumping back into it to play it to make this review. In short, Sekiro is one of the best Souls games ever made, with what I believe is the best combat in all of the Souls genre. And I obviously have to give this game a must play. It's definitely worth your money, and if you haven't played it, you should definitely give it a try.